So in this video we're going to be looking at the new Brainworx Shadow Hills mastering compressor. So this plugin is designed and emulated on the hardware piece of equipment of the same name, and anyone that's familiar with lots of plugin development companies will know that there's actually a version of this same hardware unit on the UAD platform. Now UAD commissioned Brainworx to create that plugin, and presumably the exclusive agreement between those two parties has run out, so Brainworx are now able to release this natively as well. So the first thing to note is that if you're familiar with the UAD version, you maybe own it, is that the algorithms in this native version are the same as the UAD version. So if you own that one, there's probably only a couple of minor features that are new here, and these are in the top right hand corner here. That on the UAD version, the sidechain filter is at a fixed position. I believe that's to be 90 Hertz, whereas on this one you can actually sweep it around. Okay, and if you reset it back to its default position, you'll see that that's at 90 Hertz. Okay, there's also a wet-dry mix control that's new, and also a key input. Okay, so this particular piece of hardware is renowned for its use in mastering, and also on any sort of stereo subgroups of instruments. So I like to use this all the time on my mix bus. I also quite like it on my drums bus. So despite the fact that this is obviously a stereo compressor and is called a mastering compressor, I actually find it very useful on individual instruments too, and a little bit later on we're going to be listening to this on bass guitar and vocals too. And Brainworx have handily given you a mono version of the same plugin for those sort of purposes. So what the Shadow Hills mastering compressor effectively is two compressors built into one unit with an additional transformer output. So what this plugin can do is it can kind of do some leveling out compression. So this is more like an LA2A optical circuit. It can also do a very, very flexible discrete circuit, which is basically a VCA style compressor like the SSL bus compressor. And then finally you've got a transformer section which will allow you to flick between three distinct different transformer colors, so it will give you a kind of different harmonic distortion dependent on which one you're switched onto. So effectively this is like a Swiss Army knife distortion and compression tool, and I find it incredibly useful for kind of adding some really nice mojo to my overall mix. So that's where we're going to start here. Is I've loaded up an instance on the mix bus of this kind of alt rock, hard rock track, and we're just going to listen to see what this thing sounds like. And normally I like to work with basically both compressors turned off to begin with. Okay, and I like to then flick between the different transformers and work out which kind of tonal color that I want to start with. So the nickel one here at the top is the cleanest, the most transparent. It should have some kind of extra harmonics in the top end a little bit. Then we have the iron, and this is kind of the next cleanest, and this will just have some kind of subtle low mid-range distortion characteristics. And the steel is the most distorted, and it will have this kind of overall richness and maybe some punch in the low end that the others don't have. So, you know, if you're in doubt, these three here, as you step down them, you'll notice that they gradually just get more and more distorted. Okay, so let's just have a listen to that. Okay, so what I heard there is that the nickel itself was the closest to how I remember the mix sounding before I put this on. the iron there just kind of had this nice density in the mid-range. It kind of made the weight of the guitar stand out. And the steel there really kind of meant that I had extra low end and punch out of the kick drum, which I quite liked. So let's just listen to them again. And I'm also going to turn this on bypass when we're on the nickel, so you can kind of hear what it was like before this was engaged and after. So in this case, I think that I like the steel because I like the extra body that that's given me in the low end, okay? And whenever you're using something like this, just be aware that sometimes, you know, this might not be what you want and you might want to go back to the cleaner nickel. Okay, so now let's look at the two compressors. And as you can probably see from the interface here, that we've got an optical compressor, the discrete, for the left-hand side, and we've got the optical and the discrete for the right-hand side. And in the center, just below these VU meters, we've got a dual mono mode or a stereo mode. And in stereo mode, okay, to the right-hand side here, and you can see that the lights illuminate to tell you which one you're on. The dials for the left-hand side control the compression for the right-hand side. So you don't need to set the controls on the right-hand side when you're in stereo mode. Okay, so when we're using this, I like to start by listening to what I need. And if I want some sort of overall leveling out of the signal, something that isn't too quick in its attack, and to just overall balance the kind of sustain of the sounds, I'll generally use the optical compressor for that. And if I want, you know, to either create some kind of faster sense of movement or something that's a bit quicker, I'll generally use the discrete. So these are chained in a very specific way, that the optical is the first compressor in the chain, and then the output of the optical circuit goes into the input of the discrete circuit. So just be aware of that. So usually what I'll do is listen to the source material and see if I want to use both. Okay, so let's just have a listen to the song again and look for anything that we can control dynamically. Okay, so basically what I'm hearing there is that the snare itself is quite loud, and just a little bit of peak limiting on the snare might be good to kind of help make everything else seem denser, because I think it's eating quite a bit of headroom. And actually we can see this by looking at the displays here, and you probably notice that our VU meters here are set to the optical and the discrete gain reduction, so we're not actually seeing anything because at the moment there's no compression going on. So let's select these to output, and you'll see the VU meter move, but also take a notice of this, what's called the magic eye, and this will kind of show you more of the peaks, and this will show you more of the kind of average of the sound. And notice how every time the snare hits, this magic eye jumps a lot, which is kind of giving you a visual representation of what I'm hearing. So just look out for that once. So really what I'm going to try and do is control that a bit, and I'm going to try and control it with the discrete compressor here, because the optical won't work quick enough to handle it. So I'm going to set this left hand side here to display the discrete gain reduction, and I'll set the right hand side to display optical. So a little bit later on, when I might want to use the optical, I can actually see both lots of gain reduction happening simultaneously. Okay, so let's start by setting this discrete compressor so that it's kind of getting rid of some of the start of the snare. And I don't want to go too quick with this because I don't want to kill the overall transient and the overall movement of the track too much, but I just feel like it's slightly obtrusive and slightly too loud. And by kind of having that hitting hard into the compressor and the snare really like pushing the track forward, I'm able to get a bit of bounce, but I'm kind of reining it in before it would go to any kind of mastering limiters. Okay, so I'm not going to try and go to like 0.1 here. I think that's going to be a bit too quick, but I'm going to try between 1 and 30 here and just see what kind of tightens up that snare a bit. Okay, so I'm just basically obliterating the sound at the moment so that I can really hear at what point is the discrete kicking in. And once I've kind of set this attack and release, the recovery here, to be what I want, I'm going to then back the threshold right off again. So you can hear by the time I'm getting to 10 milliseconds, it's letting all that explosive transient through already. So let's see and decide between 1 and 5 here. So that helps tuck it in a little bit, but without it being quite so grabby on the transient. So I'm going to stick to this 5 milliseconds here. And let's mess with the recovery, and at the moment this is 100 milliseconds, okay, and we end up, if we go through all these recoveries, to up to 1.2 seconds, and then we also even have like a dual stage release where it will be releasing some of the gain reduction quickly and then slowly releasing the rest. So let's just have a listen and see what we feel is best. Okay, so for me it's certainly between the fastest, the 100 millisecond, the 250 millisecond, and the dual. And in this case, I found that anything above that, it kind of made everything feel like it was unnecessarily pumping, and that it was still releasing when the next hits were coming through, and it wasn't really working to the tempo too well. In this case, I quite liked the dual. It sounded the most transparent, and even though technically some gain reduction was still happening by the next hit, it was kind of slowly releasing, and I kind of felt like that felt a bit more natural to me. So once we back the threshold off here and mess with the ratio a bit, we can then get a better idea about how it will breathe. Okay, so that's feeling a bit better, but I think that we can try a lower ratio, and this will help smoothen it even further. Okay, so that feels a bit better, but I'm going to mess with the sidechain filter here. It's already turned in, and at 90 Hertz it's going to be getting rid of a lot of the kick from the trigger circuit, but I want to do a little bit more and see if I can kind of get even less kick triggering the compression. Okay, and let's hear this before and after. So I'm going to just turn the discrete compression on and off. so that does sound better to me. And one thing I do want to mention at this point is having the attack time here at 5 milliseconds is usually a bit faster than I would typically go, and usually I'm either on 10 or 30, and what I'm trying to do is create this kind of breathing of all the instruments kind of pushing together and kind of reinforcing the natural tempo of the groove of the whole track. But in this case, the snare is quite loud, very, very punchy, and I just wanted to tuck that back in. I could have gone through and lowered the snare and lowered the level of it, but I felt like that would take away from the energy it was bringing to the track. So I wanted it loud, and I wanted to kind of hit the compressor hard, which is kind of what I'm doing. So now let's look at the optical side, and this will kind of just be leveling out the overall average of the sound, and to just try and add some level of consistency. Okay, so again, I've set this a little bit heavier than I usually would, so you can kind of hear what this compressor is doing. And the thing to notice about the optical here is that you don't have attack and release times, and that's because by default, optical circuits work with a light element that shines, and then you've got a sensor that's picking up how bright that light is, and that's how the gain reduction is happening, is basically by how much light there is received at the sensor. And that means that you don't really have a fine-tuned control of the attack and the release times. It's kind of inbuilt into the circuit itself, and because of that you have less controls. And optical circuits tend to be very, very slow in their response, so they're not good for quick things like we've just done to the snare and its overall leveling. So the ratio of it is set to about 2:1, and we have no choice on the attack and the release. Okay, so it tends to be a slow attack and a kind of medium to long release. And notice that when we're doing a considerable amount of gain reduction here, we're doing -3, we'd lost some of the breathing and movement a little bit. Okay, so typically, and this is the case with a lot of optical compressors used on mix buses or during mastering, is I'm generally only going to be doing a very, very small amount of gain reduction. So really here is like I'm going to probably be looking at somewhere between like 0.5 dB and 1 dB. And I know some mastering engineers even go even smoother, to the point as soon as they kind of see the needle starting to move, they think that that's basically starting to get a bit much. And certainly I've got an Avalon 747 mastering compressor in my studio, and I kind of see the blue light turn on even before the VU meter moves, and that seems to do the right amount of gain reduction for me. So let's relax this and see how we feel. Okay, so when it's turned on, it's not quite as punchy anymore, but it kind of brings up the lower level information just a little bit so that it kind of feels just a little bit weightier. So let's turn the whole plugin on and off and see if we feel like that's improved the sound. Okay, so I do think that's helped. The whole thing has become a lot beefier, a lot bigger, and just generally, I think that would, when we put a mastering limiter on after this, it would kind of have a better crest factor, meaning the difference between the peak levels and the average levels are much more in check, therefore we can get the overall sound a bit louder. So now that we've done that, I just wanted to show you how I usually like to use this. And at the moment we're set to stereo mode, okay? And I actually like to set this to dual mono, meaning that the left-hand side is distinct to the right-hand side. And really what I want to happen is the compressors on the left-hand side to be triggered by what's coming in on the left, and the compressors on the right-hand side being triggered from what's coming into the right. And in stereo mode, it's listening to the combined signal and then basically compressing together. So what I need to do now is match the settings on this side, and actually this is one of my constructive criticisms with the plugin, is I'd like a linked mode that even when I'm working in dual mono so that the compressors are triggering separately on the left and the right, is that the settings could be ganged on both sides. And maybe there's a hotkey to do this, but it's not written in the manual. So if anyone does know, please write that in the comments. I'd love to know. And if anyone from Brainworx is listening, maybe that's something good for an update. And I'm just going to match these settings. Great. Here. We're in there and we're in here. Great. Let's have a listen to that now. And hopefully what you'll hear compared to before is that the left and the right are kind of moving independently to each other, and that kind of creates this sense of space. Okay, that's great. And one thing that I've also found about the Shadow Hills mastering compressor is that it works really well when you then add some more kind of distortion plugins after it. So I've got the Ozone 8 Exciter, and I've got another plugin alliance Brainworx EQ here, which is the Vertigo VSM3, another distortion that I quite liked. So chaining more distortions after the Shadow Hills works quite well. Okay, great. So the next thing I want to show you is how the Shadow Hills works on some instruments that are mono. So I'm going to load this onto the lead vocal here. And actually this is a mono instrument here, but I've created a stereo channel for it here because quite often I'm given leads and doubles and other things that I want to send through the same groups but maybe pan them, so my overall lead processing is on a stereo track. So let's go ahead and let's load this on. Gonna make sure that that's in stereo mode here, and so that the settings are ganged. And basically because we've got an optical compressor going into a VCA compressor, is that this is quite comparable to a classic vocal processing chain. So it's very, very common for me to use an LA2A into an 1176. Now I don't have my UAD cards plugged into the iMac here, so you're not going to see these actually working, but this is something that's in my mix template, and it's common for me to use this sort of processing, that I've got some sort of average leveling out compressor and something that's going to hit the transients more. And as we know already, the Shadow Hills will allow us to do that. So let's go ahead and set this up on the lead vocal. Okay, so let's start by doing the same thing as we did before, turning off both compressors, moving to the output, and just having a listen to what the different transformers do and picking one that we like.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joke.
So I'm going to turn off the slaps here and the reverb so I just get a better idea of what the transformers are doing. I'm kind of being clouded by the effects.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too.
Okay, so the steel one for me this time, that extra body and low end just makes it sound a little bit muddy. And it's between the nickel and the iron. And the nickel kind of feels like it's got just more upper frequencies there. It's a little bit more aggressive, whereas the iron kind of really fills out the vocal sound. And for me, I think that that's really where I'm lacking in the vocal, and this might mean that you have to use less EQ and less other bits later on. So I'm going to stick to the iron here, and I'm now going to go ahead and see what we can do with the kind of leveling compressor. So I'm going to set this to optical, and let's have a listen.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too.
Okay, so you may have noticed that we're pulling this threshold a bit further than before, and what I'm really looking for is the moment that we kind of lose the natural shape of the vocal and kind of push it back a little bit from that and see how much we can get away with. So I was feeling at this kind of point of 17 here, we had started to lose that natural feeling of the vocal, and it started to become a little bit artificial and a little bit too obvious that it's been compressed, so I'm going to kind of back it off from there.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too.
So that feels pretty good at 14 here. And if we were to look at the gain reduction here, you may have noticed that it's letting some or quite a lot of the compression off quite quickly, and then it's slowly releasing the rest. And if you were to read the manual, you'd see that 80% of the compression is releasing a bit faster, and then the remaining 20% of the optical mode is being released very slowly. And that kind of makes it a little bit easier to hit a bit harder without it becoming obvious. So I've got it to a point where I feel like that's pretty good, and let's move on to the discrete. So I'm going to turn it on here. Let's go to discrete here. And again, what I'm going to be trying to do here is to hit a bit more of the transient. So I'm using the optical for kind of leveling. I'm using the discrete for more peak reduction. So I'm probably going to end up somewhere in the region of 0.1 to 5 milliseconds.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too.
And now I'm going to mess with the attack now. I'm kind of obliterating it just to try and work out how much of that transient I can let through, because the transient kind of has a bit of the energy, and I don't want to kill that too much, but I also want to keep it under control.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. Baby, you know.
So this is tightening it at 30 milliseconds, but I don't really feel like it's reducing the peaks at all. And I felt like 10 was a little bit the same. So I'm going to be somewhere between these four again. And for me, the 0.1 and the 0.5 were just a bit too quick. So I'm probably going to be between 1 and 5 again.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a
I like the brightness that retains at 5 milliseconds. So let's go ahead and let's mess with the threshold and the ratio next.
And I'm a loser. Baby, you know I'm a joker too.
That's feeling pretty good, but let's mess with the ratio and see how much we can get away with before, again, it sounds a bit more unnatural.
And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. 'Cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. Speaking riddles, you're mesmerized. You make me laugh and then you make them eyes. I'm begging you to make up your mind.
I quite like it on this high ratio here. It seems to really control the signal a bit more. Let's mess with the recovery time now just to see what's working there.
And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. 'Cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too.
And I actually prefer it at 100 milliseconds here. So let's keep it like that. And let's just see what level to keep the threshold at. It might just be a little bit too much at the moment.
Liar. And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. 'Cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser.
And let's hear it before and after.
Liar. And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too.
And I think that we need to turn the output gain up.
Liar. And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. 'Cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. Well, baby, you know I'm a joker too.
And let's hear how that feels in the track with the effects back again. And in this context, I feel like the ratios may be actually too high. It's kind of sounding a little bit dark. Let's try it on the nickel transformer so it retains some of that brightness. Okay, cool. Let's dip that slap delay down a little bit. Now it's compressed a bit more. It's jumping out. And now let's just go ahead and listen to it on the bass. And what I'm actually going to do here, we've got a few different channels of bass, but I'm just going to show it you on the bass DI. And the reason for that is that I want to show you the true mono mode. Okay, so let's load it here, and you'll see that now that we're on a mono channel, it's given us a mono version of the plugin. So when we load this up, the user interface is the same, but notice all these controls on the right hand side are completely greyed out, meaning that we can't do anything with it. And the only thing that we can change is the metering up here, because we still want to be able to monitor both the VU gain reduction of the optical as well as the discrete at the same time. Okay, so let's just have a quick look on the bass, and we're just going to do the same thing again. I'm going to set the transformer first and then listen to see what I need to do dynamically. Okay, so in this case, I feel like the nickel is my least favourite. It kind of brings out some of the noisy frequencies at the top of the bass, but both the iron and the steel feel quite good to me, and it's just whether I want to kind of emphasize the low mid frequencies or whether I want to emphasize the even lower frequencies. So let's put this in context, and I might need to turn it up because I don't have these other two channels of bass anymore, but let's just try and put it in context and pick a transformer there.
But I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. But baby, you know.
Okay, I really like the steel, and if this was a sort of track like maybe a soul track or something where the bottom end of the bass needs to kind of handle the main low end of the whole track, I would likely keep it on that. But in this case, I felt like it was just getting in the way of the kick too much, and I kind of wanted the kick to have a lot of low end weight. So for that reason, I'm going to stick with the iron. Okay. So now I'm going to start with the optical, just like we did with the vocals, and just see what we can get away with.
But I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. Speaker riddles, you're mesmerized. You make me laugh and then you make them eyes. I'm begging you to make up your mind.
Okay, so in this case we can get away with pushing the optical a little bit harder than on the vocal, and that's because the bass guitar itself is just more of a sustained sound. So the fact that it's releasing over a slower period of time is actually much more kind of transparent than it was on the vocal. So let's go ahead and let's try and use the discrete mode here, and I might actually take the opposite approach to the one that we've been doing so far. A lot of the time we've been trying to kind of handle some of the transient part of the sound, and in this case I just feel like the bass could be a bit punchier, and one way that you can get more punch is by letting the transient through and then kind of compressing the sustain a bit. So let's see if we can do that to help like make the bass kind of move with the tempo of the music a bit better.
But I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. Speaker riddles, you're mesmerized. You make me laugh and then you make them eyes. I'm begging you to make up your mind. Make me wait while you waste my time. Run away, I choose my fate. Better now and it's never too late. Never enough to make you contemplate. I made it right and now you stay awake. 'Cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you.
So that feels like it leaves more space for the other stuff in the track now. Let's bypass the whole plugin and see how we're feeling.
But I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser.
Notice how it seems a little bit cloudy and that our overall kind of peak level has gone down quite a bit once it's on, but we don't feel like we're losing the bass too much. And if we were to kind of match the output levels, you'll probably find that the bass just feels a lot more controlled.
But I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar.
Okay, so now that's a fairer comparison before and after. I kind of feel like I hear more of the necky sounds of, and more of the frets, and more of the kind of note of the bass and the articulation, rather than some of the boom and rumble in the low end. And I think that's for the greater good. So let's duck that back off and just listen to that in context.
But I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you. Speaking riddles, you're mesmerized. You make me laugh and then you make them eyes. I'm begging you to make up your mind. Make me wait while you waste my time. Run away, I choose my fate. Better now and it's never too late. Never enough to make you contemplate. I made it right and now you stay awake. 'Cause I'm a liar. And I'm a loser. But baby, you know I'm a joker too. But the joke's on you, 'cause I'm a liar.
Okay, so there you have it. That's an overview of the Brainworx Shadow Hills mastering compressor. If you're interested in some other recent plugin releases, please check out my video on screen now, which is on the Waves Abbey Road Studio 3. And if you have any questions or thoughts, please comment below. And also, please subscribe. I'd love to hear from you. Cheers.